We have breaking news. There has been a remarkable development in the Middle East in the what seems to be old school and new school meeting, and that is that thousands of pagers have exploded in Lebanon. And at the time we put this headline up there, even these things are happening so fast here. The headline we put up here was that more than 1,000 casualties. Well, now then, even since the time we got the headline ready to go, it's up to nearly 3,000 casualties and at least 8 known dead. And it's just absolutely remarkable about what's going on here. Let me try to set the stage a little bit for you. Here's what we know that the pagers that the Lebanese Hezbollah fighters have been using, and apparently many people in Lebanon have been using, to include the Iranian ambassador into Lebanon, who was also one of the victims here, and that's just another really friction point that could cause additional problems with between Iran and Israel, and they're still waiting to respond from the last assassination in Tehran that the Israelis killed Hania from the Hezbollah. Actually, more than 2 months ago now. Think about that time. But they have remarkable capabilities here that I personally have never even heard of this kind of a situation to go on before. Certainly not on a large scale. There's been some reports over the years about communications devices being rigged for explosives, but never have we ever seen anything on this scale. And let me just explain a little bit of the background about what's going on here. Last July, there was news, and I think it was the Associated Press. Well, it was many of the news articles. Gary, if you could put that headline up there. From what had been reported was that Hezbollah, this is in July, Hezbollah was trying to counter some of Israel's high-tech surveillance already. And what the Reuters had reported was that coded messages, landline phones, pagers, following the killing of senior commanders and targeted Israeli strikes, the Iran-backed Lebanese militant group has been using some low-tech strategies to try and evade its foes' sophisticated surveillance. What was happening around that time was that Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, had told his fighters to stop using cell phones and any kind of smartphones at all, because Israel had figured out how to tap into them and either get intelligence from them or to be able to target them. And this is something that I saw even the United States was using back during my combat deployments in both Iraq and Afghanistan, where we would zero in on an adversary's cell phone or a satellite phone. Any kind of communication devices that could be tied to a person could then be used to send a drone missile or even an FPV drone in this current time right now. And it can help to track the movements of people so they can get intelligence that way. They can know where they're going, et cetera. So Nasrallah apparently said, all right, that's it. Don't use any of the modern stuff here because we're getting tracked and many of us are getting killed. So they went to old school, which they thought was going to be safe. I mean, we're talking 1990s pagers, for crying out loud. Hardly anybody has those, but they thought that was relatively safe. Well, what's being reported so far is that some have speculated that, well, what happened is that Israel figured out some way to send a coded message and a hacked kind of cyber attack that told the phones actually to the lithium batteries to overheat, and then they would blow up. I doubt very seriously that's what happened, and I'll tell you why. There has been a few pictures on the internet already of at least one of these explosions. What happened in a not a shopping mall, it was a market, and you saw a pretty large explosion, and that did not at all look like a lithium battery going off. Those things are relatively small. The batteries themselves are quite small, obviously, in a pager, so it's not going to cause that kind of damage. But the real tell to me is that the way this happened, what's being reported so far is that a message was sent across apparently to everyone who has a pager. And when they checked their messages, then seconds later, there was an explosion. And many of them have I mean, like we said, 8 people have been killed and a number of others have lost limbs, just some pretty gruesome reactions there. But the fact that they were simultaneous and explosions of that size and magnitude almost certainly indicate the presence of explosive material. So what that means is then that this is something that has to have been planned for a long time ago. Now imagine that the Hezbollah side would certainly be doing everything they can to only use trusted sources, people that they knew, to get these devices. And as Mike Domino told me earlier today, when we were talking about some of this, he said you would think that just the minimum level of due diligence is that any kind of technology that you get, that you disassemble it, that you make sure that there's nothing hidden in it, no bugs, no explosives, etc. And presumably they didn't do that, or else it was hidden so well that they didn't recognize it, which is also a possibility. It could have been disguised as a component of an electronics or whatever, and it could have had that black plastic explosives, something military grade that's that small but packs that big of a punch. But that also means that Israel had to have somehow penetrated their supply chain. That somehow that what they thought was a trusted agent either wasn't trusted, a double agent perhaps, or they somehow managed to track down where they got their supplies from, and then on the very far end of it, they got something put into the devices even before their trusted agents purchased them. We don't know. That's a lot of speculation at the moment, but based on what we know, something very much like that is almost certainly to have happened. So this is truly, just in terms of statecraft, of the intelligence capability, is remarkable. I've never seen anything like this. But we have to look at things in the bigger picture here. And this is coming on the heels of Netanyahu saying just yesterday that they are changing their goals, their war goals for Israel. They have said now that they're prioritizing the ability to bring back their forces, their people into the northern part of Israel. And Gary, if you could put that one headline up there about the changing war goals. So some of this is coming out just today. Not that one actually, Gary. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one right there. Where Israel, according to the Washington Post here, is expanding their goals. This has been over much of the news today. And it's an important goal that he's spread here, because he says we are going to take and put our people. Remember, this is a war goal. This is not just sort of an aspiration, but a war goal. He said we want to be able to take our people back and put them into their homes in northern Israel. Now, in case you're not familiar with what that means, early in this war, when Israel made its penetration into the Gaza Strip following the October 7th terrorist attack against them, the Hezbollah side said, don't go into Gaza, because if you go into Gaza, then we're going to defend our brethren down in Hamas, and we're going to start using missiles and whatever else. And that's exactly what they did. And so that started this basically tit for tat kind of relatively modest level of back and forth missile and mortar shots and rockets, etc., both from Israel into Hezbollah and from Hezbollah into Israel. And so the northern side of the border, they evacuated all of their citizens up to a certain distance. I'm not sure how far. And then I want to say about 5 kilometers south in the Israeli side, they evacuated everybody. And we're talking 100,000 people on the Israeli side. So since late October of 2023, about 100,000 Israelis have not been living in their home. They've been living in tents or with relatives wherever else, but living as refugees in their own country. And they've been bringing a lot of political heat onto Netanyahu to solve that problem. Now, of course, as we've been talking about on this channel, that problem is solvable. The Hezbollah side has said so. If there's a ceasefire, if there's an end to the war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, then they would stop their attacks. It's the same thing that the Houthis have been saying as well. And they said as long as that war continues on, so will theirs as well. And so you have the Hezbollah side making good on that. So they periodically have rocket attacks there. So Israel can't move their people back, because then they would suffer lots of civilian casualties. So that means that Israel is faced with either having a negotiated settlement, which the U.S. is adamantly trying to get, which could stop the attacks coming from Hezbollah and allow them to move their people back to the north, or they can think that they're going to try a military solution. Now, listen, this is much, much more difficult than it may appear on the surface, because there are a lot of people who have been strongly advocating, and we've, I think, shown some on this channel here. I'm talking going back many months, possibly even toward the end of last year. Some of the military people in Israel have been saying, we need to go in and take care of Hezbollah too, because to them, they're saying, hey, technically speaking, legally speaking, there is a UN Security Council resolution out there that says that the Hezbollah fighters must relocate north of the Litani River. And I'm going to show you that in just a minute. I want to say about 25 kilometers north of the border here, because that was part of the end of the last time Israel went in 2006 to fight a war against Hezbollah in the south. and that was a very bloody. It was relatively short, but it was also inconsequential because it didn't result in any change of anything. It just was a lot of attack. They went in and then they came back out. Because they could see it wasn't winnable. At that time, they made a rational choice to say, all right, this is not going to succeed. We're just going to stay here and just keep having casualties, but we're not going to accomplish anything. So they withdrew back in 2006. And part of the negotiated settlement that ends that was required Hezbollah to move back, which they never did. They stayed in the south. So that part is true. That Hezbollah did not move back, but they have stayed in the south now. Now, they don't want to attack into Israel because they don't want Israel to attack into Lebanon. They certainly don't. But they are prepared for that. And in fact, since 2006, they have been producing, by all accounts, elaborate defensive positions. They have been stockpiling hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles and mortars of various different calibers. Apparently, some of the modern stuff that they've gotten from Iran as well. So if there is a general war between Hezbollah and Israel, it's not going to be like Israel has been fighting with Hamas, which has like old Katyusha rockets, which are basically bottle rockets in terms of their effectiveness and guidance, and very small explosive capacity, very poor terminal guidance, etc. Nothing like that at all. This is a much, much, much larger and more sophisticated arsenal. And Hamas could do tremendous damage to Israel if they get into a general war. That's on the offensive side from Hezbollah. But from the defensive side, Hezbollah is not going to attack into Israel. They're not going to try to physically send their army to the south because they would get slaughtered. They would have no chance whatsoever. But if Israel goes into Hezbollah, then they have a big problem because Hezbollah has been building these elaborate defensive positions, much like the Russians did in 2023 in preparation for the Ukrainian attack. Probably use some of the same techniques. Even the terrain is difficult and different in that part of the country, in that part of the world, of course. But some of the fundamentals are similar in that you have interconnecting fields of fire, you have concrete bunkers, you have tunnels in certain different parts, so you can pop up in one place and come up into another one. It's just this whole series of mutually reinforcing positions, so that if you fall from one to the other, you can hit someone else. So when they're trying to flank you here, you're getting flanked by other fire, etc. Common military stuff, but they've had more than a decade of time to really put a lot of emphasis on this. And so if Israel goes into this, they will have a far more difficult task. So if Netanyahu thinks that he's going to use this as an opportunity to go in, he's going to be in I think, a lot of surprise for what comes out of this. And I want to show you real quick, Gary, if you can put that map of the Litani River up. This is, I believe that this was some of the way some of the war in 2006 went, possibly even before that, but that's not important. Don't worry about the arrows or anything on there. You'll see about half the way up on the map in Lebanon, you'll see a Litani River. It cuts from east to west and cuts across basically most of the country. That is about 25 kilometers from the border. And you see Israel on the bottom there. It shows where the border is. And that's where a lot of these missile strikes have been going back and forth on either side, about 5 kilometers for the most part on either side of that. But now then, if you're talking to drive Hezbollah that far back, it's just going to be an enormously difficult task. And folks, look, this is coming on the heels of 11 consecutive months that they've been fighting Hamas, in the Gaza Strip. And so they've had lots of casualties. They're war weary. I won't say they're worn out, because they're not worn out, but they were worn down. And they are still fighting. It's still an active fight in the Hamas fight in the Gaza Strip. They have not destroyed Hamas. So they're going to have to keep that active going on, and they can't just withdraw all their troops, because then that's going to give Hamas all kinds of opportunity that they will continue the war in the rear area of Israel. And that's one of the key things here. This would be an additional front. And of course, that doesn't even touch on the fact that it's likely that if Israel moves into Hamas, that now then you've got Iran involved. It's very unlikely to me that Iran would sit on the sidelines and do nothing when their primary client in the entire region is Hezbollah. So that would make it very likely that they would expand the war. Now, part of the belief, and I think there's with some justification, is that that's exactly what Netanyahu wants, because he believes that if he's, I believe, this is my assessment here, and I'm not based on any knowledge or anything else, but just a reading of the situation here. I think it's probable, it's certainly possible, that Netanyahu is considering actually making an incursion into Lebanon, which would spawn an attack from Iran, because he's already had so many American officials, from Secretary of State and Defense on down, that have said unequivocally, if there's an attack from Iran, then we would, of course, join with it. So if Netanyahu takes actions here that spawn that very attack, then he's probably thinking that will be what finally draws the United States into war. And then instead of him fighting a war to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah, he'll also expand it into, in his mind, get rid of Iran as well. So this is like a regional situation which the Americans get all too easily drawn into. And this whole issue with the pager could presage the beginning of that, because the biggest consequence for the Hezbollah side is not just the physical casualties they endured, which apparently were significant, but the fact that now, because they're not using cell phones or any other modern technology, that even the old school pager system has now been denied to them. So they have, they've almost become blind and deaf, because it's really hard for them to communicate anywhere right now, because Israel has compromised everything. So if there is an attack in the near future, and I'm talking like maybe even tonight or tomorrow, something near term, Hezbollah is going to have a very difficult time coordinating anything. So militarily speaking, this is their most singular, most vulnerable time that they've been, because almost all their communication systems are wiped out. And they're going to have to figure out something on the fly here. I'm sure that they're working feverishly to try to do that, but there's no quick solutions to this problem. So we could be literally on the threshold of seeing an expansion of the war in the Middle East, and America will have to be incredibly disciplined to keep this from expanding further. And we have been seeing, I've seen a few notes, even publicly, that the U.S. has been warning Israel not to go into Hezbollah, not to fight Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. But we've seen that Netanyahu really doesn't pay much attention to anything that the American senior officials or the president has to say. So we should watch this very, very carefully to see what happens in the coming days as to whether Netanyahu finally just launches forward with this disastrous war that I don't think that there's any chance his country succeeds with. It will cause more casualties. It could potentially cause missiles to come raining down on Israeli cities in ways that they have never seen before and in volumes that they've never seen. And I promise you that Iron Dome, as we've had MIT professor Ted Postal point out, is not going to stop all that stuff. In fact, it's not anywhere near as effective as people think. And if it gets saturated, it could be almost inconsequential in terms of stopping missiles. And this could get really, really bad for Israel, and it could get bad for the United States if we get sucked into it. We will keep you appraised of what's going on here. This is breaking situation, and in the more information we have, we will bring it to you here on Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We will see you this afternoon at Larry the Shirt Johnson, and always one of our fan faves, here at 3 o'clock this afternoon on Washington, D.C. time. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't, but definitely tune in to see Larry this afternoon, and we will see you then on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.